It began like thousands of ordinary evenings across America. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing suggested that history was about to remember this night forever. The streets were quiet. The air was cold. A young woman left after spending time with people she trusted. She smiled. She said goodbye. She promised she would be home soon. That promise was never kept. She drove into the darkness along a familiar road. It was a route she had traveled many times before. There was no reason to be afraid. No storms, no dangerous weather, no reports of suspicious activity. Then, without warning, she disappeared. When her family realized she had not returned home, they assumed something had delayed her. They called her phone again and again. Every call went unanswered. Hours later, concern became panic. Police began searching the roads she was expected to travel. Before sunrise, they found her car. It sat alone beside the highway. The engine was off. The doors were unlocked. Her personal belongings were still inside. Nothing appeared to be stolen. There were no signs of violence, no broken glass, no blood, no obvious evidence of a struggle. It looked as though someone had simply stepped out of the vehicle and vanished into thin air. Investigators searched every inch of the surrounding area. Search dogs followed her scent for a short distance. Then it stopped, completely, almost as if she had never continued walking. Helicopters scanned nearby forests. Volunteers searched fields, rivers, abandoned buildings, and remote trails. Nothing, not a single clue explained where she had gone. As news spread across the country, the public became obsessed with the mystery. Television stations interrupted regular programming. Newspapers printed her photograph on their front pages. Thousands of people called police with possible sightings. Most of them led nowhere. Then investigators discovered something strange. Just before she disappeared, another driver reported seeing a person standing near the road. The witness could not describe whether it was a man or a woman. Only one detail stood out. The figure never moved. It simply stood there, watching. No one knew who that person was. No cameras captured the moment. No one ever came forward to identify themselves. That unknown figure would become one of the first great mysteries in a case that would confuse investigators for years. But this was only the beginning. Because the deeper detectives looked into her disappearance, the more impossible the story became. And one discovery, hidden in plain sight, would soon change the entire investigation forever. By sunrise, the disappearance had become more than a missing person case. It had become a race against time. Detectives believed that the first 48 hours would determine whether she would ever be found alive. Their first priority was simple: find the last person who saw her. Investigators retraced every minute of her final evening. They interviewed friends, co-workers, nearby residents, and anyone who might have crossed her path. Most stories matched. One did not. A truck driver came forward with a statement that immediately caught the attention of detectives. He said he had passed her car shortly before midnight. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The vehicle was parked on the shoulder of the road with its hazard lights flashing. He assumed the driver had experienced mechanical trouble. As he continued driving, he glanced in his mirror one last time. That was when he noticed something strange. Another vehicle had slowly pulled in behind her. Its headlights remained off. The truck driver could not identify the make or model. He only remembered that it was unusually dark, almost blending into the night. By the time investigators arrived hours later, that second vehicle was gone. No tire tracks remained. No surveillance cameras covered the isolated stretch of highway. It was as if the vehicle had never existed. Then another witness came forward. A local resident claimed to have heard a woman scream sometime after midnight. The sound lasted only a few seconds. When officers searched the area, they found nothing that could confirm the report. Some investigators believed the witness had imagined it. Others were not so sure. As interviews continued, detectives uncovered another disturbing detail. Several people described seeing someone standing near the road that same night. Each description was different. Some believed it was a tall man wearing dark clothing. Others insisted it was a woman with long hair. One witness even claimed the figure seemed to disappear into the fog. None of the statements matched perfectly, yet they all pointed to the same location. The mystery deepened when detectives examined nearby phone records. At exactly 11:47 p.m., her phone connected to a cell tower close to where her car was found. Seconds later, the signal vanished. Not because the battery died, not because the phone was destroyed. It simply stopped communicating. Experts found no technical explanation. Then came the interview that changed everything. A young man contacted police several days after the disappearance. He admitted he had driven past the abandoned car that night. but fear kept him from stopping. He believed someone was watching him from the trees. When detectives asked what he had seen, his answer stunned the room. "I couldn't see a face. I only saw eyes. They were reflecting in the darkness." Investigators searched those woods again. Every inch, every trail, every abandoned structure. Nothing. No footprints. No discarded clothing. No weapon. No trace of the missing woman. Only silence. The last witnesses had raised more questions than they answered. And hidden within the evidence was a contradiction so unusual that detectives began wondering whether this disappearance was connected to something far older than anyone had imagined. That contradiction would lead them to a crime scene unlike anything they had ever investigated. By the third day, investigators stopped asking one question: where did she go? Instead, they began asking another: how could someone disappear without leaving a single trace? The highway was sealed off. Crime scene specialists arrived with equipment normally reserved for major homicide investigations. Every inch of the area was photographed. Every blade of grass was examined. Every tire mark was measured. The expectation was simple. If someone had taken her, the ground would tell the story. It didn't. There were no drag marks leading into the forest, no signs of a struggle, no broken branches, no disturbed soil, no footprints that could be linked to either the missing woman or another person. It was as though the earth itself had erased the evidence. Her car became the center of the investigation. The driver's door had been closed. The keys were missing. Her purse remained inside. Her wallet was untouched. Cash was still there. Her phone was gone. Nothing suggested robbery. Nothing suggested she had planned to disappear. Forensic teams dusted every surface for fingerprints. Most belonged to the woman herself. A few belonged to family members. There were no unidentified prints. Even more confusing, the outside of the vehicle had recently been exposed to light rain, yet the roof carried several clean streaks, as though something had rested on top of the car before being removed. Investigators could never determine what caused them. Search dogs were brought back. This time, handlers started from inside the vehicle. The dogs followed her scent across the roadside for nearly 100 yards. Then every dog reacted the same way. They stopped, circled the same small patch of ground, and refused to continue. Experienced handlers had seen this behavior before. It usually meant one thing: the scent had ended abruptly, almost as if she had entered another vehicle, but no tire tracks supported that theory. Detectives were trapped between two impossible explanations. Either she had willingly left with someone, or the evidence itself had disappeared. Days turned into weeks. Laboratories tested every fiber recovered from the car. One result stood out. A single dark fiber was discovered beneath the driver's seat. It matched nothing inside the vehicle. Not the seats, not her clothing, not any item she owned. The laboratory could identify the material, but not its source. It became one of the case's most frustrating clues. Then investigators uncovered something no one expected. Less than half a mile from where the car had been found, stood the remains of an abandoned roadside motel. It had closed decades earlier, after a series of unexplained incidents. Locals avoided the place. Many claimed strange lights appeared there after midnight. Others said they heard voices coming from empty rooms. Detectives dismissed the stories as local folklore, until they searched the building. Inside one of the crumbling rooms, they found something impossible to ignore. A small silver necklace. It looked almost identical to the one the missing woman had been wearing on the night she vanished. But there was one problem. Her family insisted she had never taken it off. The necklace was sent for forensic testing. Everyone expected it to provide answers. Instead, it created an even bigger mystery, because the DNA recovered from the necklace did not belong to just one person. It belonged to someone investigators had never heard of, and that name would pull the investigation into a dark secret hidden for decades. The DNA results arrived under tight security. Detectives expected the sample to identify a suspect. Instead, it introduced a completely unknown name. The person had no criminal record, no driver's license, no employment history, no tax records. According to every government database, that individual had never officially existed. Investigators assumed it was a laboratory error. The evidence was tested again, then a third time. Each result came back exactly the same. The DNA belonged to the same unidentified person. The mystery had become even stranger. Detectives shifted their attention to the abandoned motel. Old county records revealed that it had closed more than 30 years earlier after a series of unexplained disappearances. Officially, the cases were unrelated. Unofficially, retired officers remembered something different. Several missing travelers had last been seen near that property. None of them were ever found. One retired detective agreed to speak. He had spent years investigating those forgotten cases. He opened a worn cardboard box filled with faded photographs, handwritten notes, and newspaper clippings. One photograph made everyone in the room fall silent. It showed a young woman who had disappeared decades earlier. She looked remarkably similar to the current victim. The resemblance was so striking that investigators briefly wondered if they were related. DNA testing ruled that out. Still, the similarity was impossible to ignore. Then another pattern emerged. Every disappearance had happened within a few miles of the same stretch of highway. Different years, different victims, different circumstances. The same location. Coincidence was becoming harder to believe. As detectives reviewed the missing woman's digital records, they found something unexpected. A week before she vanished, she had searched for the abandoned motel several times. She had also downloaded old newspaper articles about the earlier disappearances. She had told no one why. Had she discovered something? Or had someone wanted her to find it? Her email revealed one final clue. An anonymous message had arrived just 2 days before she disappeared. There was no subject line, only one sentence. The truth is waiting where everyone stopped looking. Investigators traced the message. It had been sent through multiple anonymous servers. The trail ended almost immediately. Whoever sent it knew exactly how to hide. The case took another disturbing turn when detectives interviewed residents living near the motel. An elderly woman shared a story she had never told police. On the night of the disappearance, she looked out her window after hearing a car door slam. She expected to see someone walking along the road. Instead, she saw two figures standing perfectly still. One appeared to be the missing woman. The other was too dark to identify. Neither of them moved. Then, according to her, both figures disappeared behind a thick wall of fog. When the fog drifted away, the road was empty. Detectives searched the area again. This time, ground-penetrating radar was used around the motel. Beneath the cracked concrete floor, technicians discovered a hidden underground chamber. The entrance had been sealed for decades. As officers forced the rusted door open, stale air escaped into the night. Their flashlights revealed old furniture, broken suitcases, children's toys, and dozens of names carved into the walls. One name stood out above all the others. It matched the unidentified DNA profile. The person who officially did not exist had somehow left their name inside a room that had been sealed for over 30 years. And what investigators found deeper inside that chamber would completely change the direction of the case. The underground chamber should not have existed. County blueprints showed nothing beneath the motel, yet there it was, hidden below layers of cracked concrete. The air inside was cold, not naturally cold, the kind of cold that seemed to settle into your bones. Investigators moved carefully through the narrow corridor. Dust covered every surface. It looked as though no one had entered the chamber for decades. Then a flashlight beam caught something on the wall. Hundreds of scratches. Not random marks, perfect vertical lines. Someone had been counting. Days, weeks, or perhaps years. At the end of the corridor stood a small wooden door. Its rusted lock had long since fallen away. Inside was a room no larger than a storage closet. There was an old chair, a cracked mirror, and a notebook lying on the floor. Most of the pages had rotted away. Only a few remained readable. The handwriting was shaky. The final sentence stopped every investigator in the room. If you hear someone calling your name outside, do not answer. No signature, no date, no explanation. The notebook was sent for analysis. Experts estimated it had been written nearly 40 years earlier. That discovery reignited an old rumor that had haunted the town for generations. Locals called it the calling. According to the legend, travelers on that highway sometimes heard a familiar voice late at night. It sounded exactly like a loved one. The voice always came from somewhere beyond the trees. Those who followed it were said to disappear. Most investigators dismissed the story as folklore, but not everyone. A retired state trooper requested a private meeting with detectives. He admitted that, years earlier, he had responded to 3 separate missing person cases along the same highway. Each witness had described hearing the same thing, a voice they recognized, a voice that should have been impossible. He had never included those statements in his official reports. He feared no one would believe him. As news of the chamber leaked, paranormal investigators arrived from across the country. They brought thermal cameras, audio recorders, and electromagnetic sensors. Police allowed only limited access. Most recordings captured nothing unusual, until one team reviewed audio recorded just after midnight. Between long moments of silence, a faint whisper could be heard. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Audio experts enhanced the recording. The words became clearer. "Come back." No one present remembered hearing a voice at the time. Skeptics argued it was radio interference. Believers called it proof. The public quickly divided into two camps. One believed a human killer had hidden behind local legends. The other believed something far older haunted that road. While the debate grew louder, detectives made a discovery almost no one noticed. The names carved into the chamber wall were not random. They were arranged in chronological order. Each matched a real missing person case, except for one. The final name had never appeared in any police record. It belonged to the same unidentified person whose DNA had been found on the necklace. Investigators finally realized they weren't just searching for a missing woman, they were uncovering a mystery that had remained hidden for decades. And the next discovery would reveal that someone had been quietly collecting evidence the entire time, waiting for the right moment to expose the truth. The investigation had reached a point where every new answer created two more questions. The unidentified name, carved into the chamber wall, refused to disappear from the case. Detectives searched every federal, state, and local archive. Nothing. It was as though someone had deliberately erased an entire identity. Then an unexpected phone call changed everything. A retired investigative journalist claimed he had spent nearly 20 years researching disappearances along the same highway. He agreed to meet detectives only if his name remained confidential. When they arrived, he placed 3 weathered boxes on the table. Inside were newspaper clippings, photographs, maps, cassette tapes, and handwritten notes. He pointed to one map. Red circles marked dozens of locations. Every circle represented a person who had vanished. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Nearly every disappearance had occurred within the same narrow corridor. It stretched for less than 20 miles. The journalist explained that he had tried to publish his findings years earlier. His editor refused. The story was considered too speculative. Without official proof, it never reached the public. Then he revealed something even stranger. Several victims had disappeared under nearly identical circumstances. A disabled vehicle, a short phone call, an unexplained silence, and then, nothing. No body, no confirmed suspect, no clear motive. Detectives compared his files with official police records. Many details matched perfectly. Others had never appeared in any report. One photograph immediately caught their attention. It showed the abandoned motel in the early 1980s. Parked outside was a dark sedan, the same type of vehicle described by the truck driver on the night the young woman disappeared. The image was grainy. The license plate could not be read. But one detail stood out. A circular emblem was attached to the driver's door. Investigators enlarged the photograph. The emblem resembled the logo of a private security company that had gone out of business decades earlier. Records showed the company had quietly dissolved after several employees were questioned in unrelated criminal investigations. No charges were ever filed. Most of its employment records had disappeared. Then detectives uncovered an old cassette tape inside the journalist's collection. A handwritten label read, "Witness interview, never released." The recording began with static. A nervous voice slowly emerged. The witness claimed to have stopped near the motel one rainy night years earlier. He said he saw several people standing outside. None of them moved. None of them spoke. Then one of them slowly turned toward him. The witness ended the interview with a sentence that investigators could never forget. They looked alive, but something about them wasn't human anymore. No one knew whether fear had distorted his memory or whether he had seen something real. The tape ended abruptly. Detectives attempted to identify the witness. They couldn't. The name had been removed from every document. Someone had intentionally erased it. That realization brought the investigation to a chilling conclusion. For years, pieces of this mystery had been hidden in different places. Different files, different agencies, different investigations, separated just enough to prevent anyone from seeing the full picture. Now those pieces were finally coming together, and among them was one forgotten piece of evidence that had sat untouched inside a police storage room for nearly 3 decades. It was about to become the most important clue in the entire investigation. Nearly 30 years earlier, officers responding to an unrelated case had collected a small cardboard evidence box. It was labeled, cataloged, and placed into storage. No one ever opened it again. Not because it was hidden, because no one realized it mattered. When detectives reviewed old inventory logs connected to the abandoned motel, The box appeared on a forgotten evidence list. A clerk retrieved it from the archive. Dust covered the lid. The tape sealing it had turned brittle with age. Inside were only a few items: an old wristwatch, a rusted key, a disposable camera, and a folded piece of paper. The watch had stopped at exactly 11:47 p.m., the same minute the missing woman's phone had last connected to the nearby cell tower. At first, investigators assumed it was coincidence. Then they examined the disposable camera. To everyone's surprise, the film had never been developed. Technicians carefully processed the photographs. The first few images showed the motel during daylight. Broken windows, empty parking spaces. Nothing unusual. The next photograph froze the entire investigation. A dark sedan was parked outside. The same type of vehicle described by witnesses. Standing beside it was a man whose face was partly hidden by shadow. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood several motionless figures. Their faces were blurred, even though everything else in the image was perfectly sharp. Experts blamed the distortion on damaged film. Others weren't convinced. The final photograph was the most disturbing. It showed the motel entrance just after sunset. A young woman was walking toward the building. Investigators compared the image with missing person files. She matched the appearance of a woman who had disappeared 26 years earlier. She had never been connected to the motel, until now. The folded paper inside the evidence box contained a list of names. Most belonged to known missing person cases. One name had been circled. It was the same unidentified person whose DNA had appeared on the necklace and whose name had been carved into the underground chamber. Detectives finally realized this unknown individual had been linked to nearly every major clue. Yet there was still no official record proving they had ever existed. Then forensic analysts made an unexpected discovery. The rusted key found in the box matched the lock of a safety deposit box in a bank more than 200 miles away. The account had not been accessed in decades. With a court order, investigators opened it. Inside was a sealed envelope. No money, no valuables. Just a handwritten journal. Its first page contained a sentence that immediately changed the direction of the investigation. If you are reading this, I failed to stop them. The journal described years of quiet surveillance. The writer claimed a small group had been following travelers along the highway for decades. They carefully selected isolated victims. They left almost no evidence. Whenever an investigation came too close, records disappeared. Witnesses changed their stories. Files were misplaced. The author admitted something else. They had spent years collecting proof, but they no longer knew who they could trust. The final pages had been torn out. No ending, no names, no explanation of who they were. Only one final clue remained. Tucked inside the back cover was a faded map. A single location had been marked with a red circle. It wasn't the motel. It wasn't the highway. It was an abandoned farmhouse nearly 50 miles away. Detectives immediately organized a search team. What they would discover beneath that farmhouse would force them to question everything they believed about the disappearance, and reveal a truth far darker than anyone had imagined. The abandoned farmhouse stood alone at the end of a forgotten dirt road. No neighboring houses, no electricity, no signs of recent visitors. Nature had slowly reclaimed the property. Broken windows stared into the empty fields. The roof sagged under years of neglect. Yet something felt wrong. There were fresh tire tracks leading to the front gate. Someone had been there recently. Detectives entered cautiously. Every room was covered in dust. Furniture remained exactly where it had been left decades earlier. Family photographs still hung on the walls. Whoever had lived there had disappeared without packing a single belonging. Upstairs, investigators found a locked bedroom. The door showed fresh scratches, as if someone had tried to force it open from the inside. When they finally entered, the room was almost empty. Only a wooden desk stood beside the window. Inside the desk was a false compartment. Hidden beneath it was a stack of cassette tapes. Each tape carried only a date. No names, no labels. Forensic technicians restored the oldest recording. A man's voice filled the room. He sounded calm, methodical, almost emotionless. He spoke about observing travelers along the highway. He described their routines, their habits, the places where they stopped. It sounded less like a diary and more like surveillance. Then came a sentence that made every detective stop taking notes. The next subject has no idea she's already been chosen. The date on the tape matched one of the earliest disappearances connected to the highway. Investigators listened to every recording. Over the years, the voice never changed. The speaker always referred to victims as subjects, never by name. never as people. Near the end of the collection, one tape mentioned the missing woman from the current investigation, not directly, only by initials, but the timeline matched perfectly. The recording ended before revealing what happened to her. Detectives finally had something they had lacked from the beginning, a potential suspect. The voice was analyzed and compared against thousands of archived recordings. After days of work, forensic experts produced a possible match. A former investigator, someone who had once worked missing person cases decades earlier. The discovery was almost impossible to believe. If the analysis was correct, the person investigating disappearances might also have been connected to them. Officers rushed to locate him. They were too late. He had died years before the current investigation began. Officially, his death was ruled natural causes. His grave was opened for DNA confirmation. The results ruled him out completely. The voice was not his. The strongest suspect had become another dead end. Then detectives noticed something almost everyone had overlooked. The recordings contained a faint ticking sound in the background. Not a clock, not machinery. Audio specialists isolated the sound. It matched the crossing signal of an old railway line. Only one abandoned railway crossing in the entire region produced that exact pattern. It lay less than 3 miles from the farmhouse. Search teams arrived before sunrise. Hidden beneath overgrown vegetation, they discovered the entrance to a long-forgotten service tunnel. The tunnel had been sealed for decades, yet someone had broken through from the inside. Fresh footprints disappeared into the darkness. For the first time in the investigation, detectives believed they were no longer chasing the past. Someone might still be there, and what waited at the end of that tunnel would become the most terrifying discovery of the entire case. The tunnel entrance was barely visible beneath thick vines and fallen concrete. It looked forgotten, but the fresh footprints told a different story. Someone had entered recently. No one had come back out. A tactical team moved inside. The tunnel stretched for hundreds of feet beneath the hillside. The air was damp. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling. Every sound echoed through the darkness. Then the team reached a steel door. It had been welded shut years earlier, yet someone had cut a narrow opening through it. The edges of the metal were still bright. The cut was recent. Beyond the door was a hidden network of underground rooms. Generators hummed quietly in the distance. Someone had supplied electricity. Someone had been using this place. Inside the first room, detectives found shelves lined with carefully labeled boxes. Each box contained newspaper clippings about missing person cases. Every victim had been researched. Photographs, maps, timelines, police reports. Nothing appeared random. Whoever created the archive had studied disappearances for decades. In the next room, investigators found dozens of cassette tapes, hard drives, and notebooks. Some described surveillance. Others documented witness interviews that had never appeared in official files. One notebook contained a chilling sentence: "People only notice what they're told to notice." Another read, "The perfect crime leaves behind a story instead of evidence." Then they discovered the final room. At its center stood a large wall map. Red pins marked every disappearance connected to the highway. Blue pins marked every failed investigation. Black pins marked places where evidence had mysteriously vanished. Standing in front of the map, the lead detective realized something. This wasn't the workspace of a ghost. It wasn't proof of a supernatural force. It belonged to someone who understood investigations better than the investigators themselves. Someone who knew exactly how police searched, exactly how evidence was processed, exactly how cases slowly fell apart. The mystery had been manipulated by intelligence, not magic. Yet one impossible question remained. Who had built this archive? Fingerprints recovered from the underground rooms belonged to several people. Most were unidentified. One belonged to the missing woman. She had been there. There was no longer any doubt. But there was no sign of what happened after that. No blood, no remains, no indication that she had died inside the tunnels. Only another message, written in black marker across the concrete wall. You finally found the wrong place. Investigators searched every inch of the underground complex. Hidden behind a loose concrete panel, they discovered a narrow passage leading outside. The exit opened into dense woodland. Rain had washed away nearly every trace. The trail disappeared within minutes. Whoever had used the tunnels had escaped long before police arrived. Weeks later, detectives announced the most likely explanation. They believed the disappearance had been carried out by an organized individual, or possibly a small network, that carefully selected isolated victims, manipulated evidence, and exploited abandoned locations to remain invisible for decades. It was the strongest theory ever presented, but it still wasn't proof, because the most important person in the entire investigation had never been identified, and one final discovery would leave America questioning whether the case had truly ended, or whether the mystery was still continuing. Months passed. The search slowed, the headlines faded, television crews packed their equipment, roadblocks disappeared, the highway returned to its quiet routine. But the investigation never truly ended. Detectives spent years reviewing every piece of evidence one final time: the abandoned motel, the underground chamber, the farmhouse, the hidden tunnel, the photographs, the journal, the recordings. Together, they painted a disturbing picture. Someone had spent decades studying disappearances. Someone had understood exactly how investigations worked. Someone had always stayed one step ahead. Yet one question refused to disappear. Who was the unidentified person whose name appeared everywhere? Their DNA had been found on the necklace. Their name had been carved into the underground chamber. It appeared inside the journal. It was listed among forgotten evidence. And still, no official record proved that person had ever existed. Some investigators believed the unidentified individual was the mastermind. Others believed they were another victim. A few argued they had been trying to stop the crimes, but vanished before exposing the truth. No theory explained every clue. Years later, advances in forensic technology re-examined the evidence. DNA profiles were updated. Photographs were digitally enhanced. Audio recordings were cleaned using modern software. Several details became clearer. None solved the mystery. The missing woman's family never stopped searching. Every anniversary, they returned to the same stretch of highway. They placed flowers near the place where her car had been found. They refused to believe hope was gone. One evening, a local photographer stopped along that same road to capture the sunset. When reviewing his pictures at home, he noticed something unusual. Standing near the tree line was the outline of a woman. She wore clothing similar to what the missing woman had been wearing years earlier. The photographer insisted no one had been there when he took the picture. Experts examined the image. Some concluded it was a trick of light. Others argued it was too detailed to dismiss. No agreement was ever reached. Then came one final surprise. While digitizing old case files, an archivist discovered a sealed envelope that had been filed under the wrong case number decades earlier. Inside was a handwritten note. No signature. No fingerprints. Only one sentence. You were never looking for one missing person. You were looking for all of us. Investigators could never determine who wrote it, or when. The note remains one of the final pieces of evidence in the case. Today, the official investigation remains open. No one has been convicted. No complete explanation has ever been accepted. The identity of the unknown figure remains a mystery. The true purpose of the hidden tunnel is still debated, and the missing woman has never been found. Perhaps the answer lies in evidence that has yet to be discovered. Perhaps someone, somewhere, still knows exactly what happened that night. Or perhaps the greatest mysteries survive because they are never meant to be completely solved. As long as that lonely highway stretches into the darkness, the disappearance that changed America forever will continue to haunt everyone who hears its story.